Welcome to this week's segment of Behind the Column. My name is Michael Fitzgerald. I write a column called Right On for the Finger Lakes Times newspaper of Geneva, New York. And every week in these brief video segments, I try to explain a little bit about the column that I wrote for this particular week, why I wrote it, what I put in it, what I didn't put in it, and maybe a little look at what I'm going to write about for next week. So for this week, here's Behind the Column. This past week took me to Oberlin, Ohio, to the Kendal community at Oberlin and also Oberlin College, where I gave 3 talks in 2 days and did 1 book signing. Sylvia and I were guests of Ann and John Elder, who live in Hector part of the year and the other part of the year in the Kendal. They're activists both here in Hector and in Ohio. The first stop on the tour had me speaking to an environmental studies class, and it was in that class that I decided that perhaps I could do my column this week about the whole trip to Oberlin. This is the building where I gave the first lecture, and I could probably have written a column just about the design of this building. It was so amazing. Maybe in another column. Reading, learning, or having to present. I truly think that hydrofracking is one of the greatest environmental threats I think that the country has faced. Now, this comes from somebody who has my minor when I was in college was physics. You shouldn't be impressed by that at all, because the physics classes I took, I thought pretty easy the way that they come. They're more social responsibility than mathematics, thank God. But the novel has met with a lot of interesting reactions. I have mailed this to the presidents of most of the major gas companies in the United States. They haven't written back. I barely finished my speech at the college, and suddenly I was catapulting over to the Kendal, where I had another speech to give before a very, very interested and interesting audience who quizzed me probably a lot tougher than the college students did. You don't have to ask those questions. You don't have to include that kind of information. You can say that the bad guys are the bad guys, and you can prove it through your, through the way you write things. In the fracking war, I just wasn't constrained by those kind of rules. And it's similar to lots of people over the years, and I'm not claiming to be anywhere near the stature of the people whose names I'm about to throw out here, but they did the same thing. I'll start with Harriet Beecher Stowe, because that's certainly a name that most of the people in here recognize. Uncle Tom's Cabin. When Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, she didn't go out to the slave owners and say, I'm writing this book about the slaves, and they say it's pretty bad, and I can see that it's really awful, and what do you say about that? Well, she didn't have to include that in her work. And when John Steinbeck wrote The Grapes of Wrath, about the California migrant camps and all of the problems of the people of Oklahoma and out of the Great Dust Bowl, Steinbeck didn't go over to the farm owners and say, I'm writing about the Joad family here, and what do you think about what I've written here? Do you think it's fair? As part of the trip, I also went to the Mind Fair bookstore, which is tucked inside this little Ben Franklin, probably one of the last Ben Franklins left in America. Lots of good discussions about the book. Lots of discussions about what's going on with the Ebola crisis, too. Interesting how all of these things are all tying together. Hope you enjoyed this week's Behind the Column, and I hope you got a little insight into what it's like in Oberlin, Ohio. At least a little bit of Oberlin that I saw. I'm sure I'm going to be going back there. Next week, my column is going to look quite possibly at this wild and crazy oil situation we have going on with the falling oil prices. Or it may get back into politics. I'm not really sure. In any event, thanks for listening. Hope to see you next week.